Welcome to Creative Conversations, where I ask my guests, what does the word creativity mean to you? My name is Nina Lenton. I'm an untangler and coach, and I work with founders and freelancers who have lots of ideas, but aren't making progress on the ones that really matter to them. And I'm here today with Osmaan Sharif, who is a strengths-focused business coach for established experts. Good morning.
Hello, Nina. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. And do you want to just explain a little bit about what you do before we get into our questions and chat about creativity?
Absolutely. So, in essence, I love helping experts to grow their business in a way that actually fits them so that it actually feels so much more enjoyable. They get better results. They cut through all the noise and all the shoulds that can sometimes make life as experts and business owners much harder than it needs to be. So really kind of leaning into doing it your best way.
Excellent. Right, so we'll get straight into it then. What does the word creativity mean to you?
Oh, it's a big word, isn't it, creativity? And it can have many different meanings. For me, the two words that come up is problem solving and curiosity. Those are the two words that when I think about creativity, there's lots of ways of doing things, and a lot of it is about just kind of how do we solve the problems or opportunities in that way. But having that mindset of curiosity makes a huge difference in terms of how we approach things.
Yeah. So and how do you see that in yourself? I mean, how do you use those kind of things in your business?
I think every single day, and when I'm working with my coaching clients and, you know, even grow my business as well, it's being curious. And I think that's what's helped me to keep going in business. It's now been coming up for just after 19 years since I left the corporate world. And I think the things have constantly evolved. And, you know, even when I'm working with clients and if they've got challenges or opportunities or struggling, it's just kind of getting really curious around like why is that happening, or what can we do to help them in that way. So I love that word though, because it's not something that I always think about naturally. It's not, I don't go, oh, I now need to be creative, but actually essentially it's about like kind of going, oh, like why, or, you know, having that kind of like, let's get in there, let's dissect that, let's figure out what's really happening. That's kind of what really does help us to often see things differently, or to find a different approach or get a different perspective. And all of that is still being curious and how do we fix things and how do we make it better.
So that's the problem solving thinking side of creativity that I often talk about. And I mean, we can come back to some of that in a minute, but outside of that, would you have said you're creative in a sort of in the way that people might normally think of creative?
I think in the sense of, it depends how we see it, because I would naturally, if I think back to even kind of my school days, many years ago, right, I wasn't the most natural like artist, for example. So like art and design, etc., just wasn't my flow. My sister, ironically, loved it. She went to Glasgow Art School. She's a art teacher. So in the what most people would think about in that more traditional sense, you know, she's creative. But whereas actually I loved like more computing. Does that make sense? And then when I went to university, I did business management, but I loved a lot of the stuff that was much more about like, how do humans work? So it's still curiosity. It's still kind of, it's still creativity, but it's more like, I guess it was more the techie stuff from the IT kind of side, just so I'm still kind of curious around like, oh, like what's happening here, so I'm very creative. And then if I think about the things that I've done in my business, like it still sparks around a lot of curiosity and creativity, like, you know, how do I do a podcast, how do I do videos, how do I come up with ideas and models, but it's not the most natural label that I'd ever use myself, and there's probably a lot around that. And I know me and you, we've talked about, you know, wealth dynamics is one of the tools that I actually kind of use, and I'll share one quick example. If you think about creativity, and the way I used to think about creativity, and a lot of my clients think about creativity, is you have a blank sheet of paper, you create something brand new. That's not my flow zone. Okay. Right. And I remember years ago, just after I got married, I was sitting with a blank sheet of paper on the sofa, trying to figure out something. And I remember just staring at it going, and my wife, Shireen, she was looking at me, she's like, what's up? I was like, oh, I feel like I'm not, like it was like hard. Does that make sense? I was like forcing it.
You couldn't get started.
I couldn't get started. And she's looking at it, she's like, why? It's like, it's like a blank sheet of paper. And it was so funny. She actually just took a pen from my hand and she just went, this isn't a blank sheet of paper anymore at the corner. And she's like, on you go. And it was just so funny. Like when I actually saw something on the paper and then I went, oh, okay. And then as soon as I stopped trying to kind of force it or go, what does it look like? It's like, okay, what's my ideas? What's my thoughts? Let me just kind of start to kind of like capture it down. Yeah. It was being creative in my way, but not that kind of natural blank sheet of paper, love to start something from brand new. I'm often kind of looking at it more about, right, what are we trying to do here? What's it look like? What's the problem to solve? And that's kind of where I think for business owners, when I work, and I know this because that's what I fundamentally do with my clients, is it's how do we help you to do things in a way that actually flows for you, so it feels more natural, it feels more easier. It's where you kind of show up in your best way versus trying to do it using a strategy or an approach that might work well for somebody else compared to you. So it then ends up, if you follow that strategy, it's like, yeah, you can do it, but it's a lot of effort. So for some people, like my sister, give her a blank sheet of paper and she's like, all these, amazing ideas in a different way, but it's just not the way that I approach creativity. But, I still, going back to your original question, Nina, I still do love like creative outlets. Like I do love like, photography. My dad used to be a photographer. So there's the elements I'm like, I'm always capturing things like, what does that look like? And even, Lego. I'm a huge Lego fan, right? And for me...
Oh, that's creative as well.
It's creative, right? It's creative. But can you see the difference? My favourite type of Lego is being creative when you actually still follow the instruction manual, right? Whereas one of my sons, Aaron, he's very much like me. He's like, okay, what's next? Whereas Caius, who's like my eldest, he is very much more about, we've got all these pieces. What could we make? Does that make sense? So he's kind of like throws away the instruction manual. And our youngest, he's only little, just now at 6. He's just more getting into it, like what's the best ways. And so it's kind of finding there's different approaches.
That's really interesting. In fact, it's funny how Legos sort of come up quite a bit on this podcast. So one of my guests in the previous series does Lego play workshops with Lego. Yeah. Adrian, if you'd listened to that one. And actually someone else in this series, Claire, in episode 2, we were chatting about Lego as well. And actually it is quite interesting thinking about the way people create, because I know I'm kind of like you. If you give me... Well, I think most of the time, if you give me a blank page, I would probably sit there and go, I'd have to... I often find that well, I mean, you know me because we've talked lots over the last however many years, but... I tend to be prompted by someone else's thought. Yeah. So it might be I might solve their problem, or I might write something in response to a question someone's asked me, or so I mean, so I think it's very interesting to think about where that creativity comes from and what prompts it to happen.
Absolutely. And it's when you understand that's where you get to really experience the magic, to be able to kind of go, like, how do I do it? And I think going back to the Lego part, for me, it's part of an escapism, right? But also it's that sense of achievement as well.
Yeah. So I know that I first came across you, it was probably your wealth dynamics workshop. Yeah. And I can remember when it was, because it prompted me to then start working with clients in a certain kind of way at that point. Yeah. And so obviously you talk about all of the different kinds of ways people think. Do you find that your clients fall into one category more than others, or do you literally see all kinds of different people?
A bit of both, right? And the reason why I say this is that I actually don't work with any business clients at all until I know what their wealth dynamics profile is. And the reason why that is it gives me, and I kind of think about it, and I use the term, it helps to unlock your entrepreneurial superpower. Okay? Yeah. So there's no point in me trying to coach or guide or mentor someone in their business if we don't know which of the 8 type of styles is more aligned to them, because it means that effectively, it makes it harder for them, it makes it harder for me to coach. So that's kind of where it's like the first kind of big step is to kind of go, right, okay, what does that look like for them? And then what do they best need? So in that situation, Nina, I have clients, like over the years, I've had clients that are all 8 of the profiles, okay? So it gives me that chance to go, how do I adapt it in that way? But then I do tend to, so some of my longer term coaching clients tend to be those that are the opposite profiles for me. So I'm a trader profile, okay? So I'm very much more grounded. I love things to be much more calm, consistent, long lasting. So multitasker is kind of like, my middle name, right? But it's very much more like what's happening right now. How do we deal with this in a very practical way? And also kind of reading like between the lines and understanding what does that individual need. That's very different from what is the opposite kind of business owner, which the label for that one is a creator, okay? And going back to what we were talking about, that's that type of business owner that constantly is more vision-led. They love to kind of work really fast, give them a blank piece of paper. They're the type of business owner that has no shortage of ideas. But the reason why, we work really well together is because I'm like their yin to their yang. They don't actually need a business coach, and actually it can be quite detrimental if they're working with someone that is like them, because they don't need ideas. As I'm saying, what they need is they need somebody to help them to kind of go like, what does that look like? How does that fit into what are we trying to do here in that way? And similarly, there's 8 different profiles. So I've talked about the creator, I've talked about the trader. You've got like a star profile. They're the type of person that they are, again, quite visionary. They're really good at getting themselves out there much more. They're really confident, kind of showing up. They love visibility. That's how they get in their best superpower. But they don't have to create things from a blank piece of paper. But what they're really good at is they're good at taking, let's say, a concept and going, this is what it looks like, but what's my take on it, okay? And then shining the light on that. So, for example, the Mel Robbins in the world, the Marie Forleos, the Oprahs, for example, they are classic examples of star profiles. So those are the type of business owners that are the opposite for me. And that's kind of like, again, how I tend to attract working more long-term with those clients, because they don't have naturally the type of thinking that I have. And that's kind of what they need to kind of help to grow the business.
Yeah. And I was just going to say, that's interesting you mentioned. I mean, I guess people listening to this will have to direct them to somewhere to read a bit more about this, because
Absolutely.
we both know a fair bit about this this terminology. But that's interesting you say about the star talking about their own take on something, actually, because that's sort of a new angle for me, having known a bit about them. Those people tend to be people who have brands a bit more. They sort of the kind of person who would attract people to them. But yes, that's interesting you say about them putting their own angle on something.
Yeah. And that's kind of where they create their attraction, because it's like for them, they look at things and they go, okay, but how do I connect to it? But again, let me just kind of take this full cycle. Like a star profile, they love variety. They love kind of being in front of people and what does that look like. But the thing that they're not as good at then is how do they turn that into often the consistency in a business, right? Because they're often like, okay, what's next? So have you ever been in a situation, Nina, where you're so attracted to what that person might say on a stage or a podcast, and then you go, I want to work with them. But when you actually work with them, especially if they're a star, and I know I'm generalising this, you might then go, okay, they're not quite the same when I'm actually kind of like working with them on a one-to-one basis, because it's just not where they get their energy, for example, right? So it's about how do we figure that out? And it goes back to kind of creativity, like the core part of the conversation, because if you, as a business owner or whatever you're doing, if you recognize what's your best way, it then allows you to then go, how do you, like, say, do you design your business in the way that's designed for you? And that includes things like the way that you've got your direction and the clarity around what do you want to make happen. How do you actually even think about your business model in the best way for you? So I love working one-to-one with clients. Some stars try that and then they get quite burnt out quite quickly and they go, that doesn't work for me. So even in that element, it's about how do you figure it out and be creative to go, there's not just one way to, let's say, have a business, but you get to kind of go, what's your best way, and get curious and figure out that as an opportunity.
I think it's interesting what you say about, obviously, there are a lot of people who've appeared on my podcast who talk about ideas. In particular, we talk about the thing about buying domain names, having an idea, buying a domain name, going, oh yeah, that's the idea, that's the one. And then 3 days later, no, actually, no, there's something else. So you're talking to people who have all those kind of ideas that actually they do need grounded and practical people like you and actually like me to help them pull those things through and to actually turn them into something.
Yeah. And it's also then about, it goes into the approach. So again, another thing that I help my clients do is, so obviously that I mentioned, how do you make sure your business is designed for you? But then how do you actually turn your strengths into strategies? And that includes, for example, you know, if you're not, let's say, I know we talked about star, if that's not your natural superpower, then it doesn't mean that you go, oh, I can't grow my business. I better just give up, right? But you can then be much more creative with how you do that, and that's where you might go, okay, well, my best way might be doing it through collaborations, okay? Or that's kind of where we've got other superpowers, so like the supporters, you know, from Wealth Dynamics. They're really, really good at empowering through connections and community and building empathy and championing others. Deal makers are a different kind of, they have a different approach. They're that trusted bridge between, okay, people, timing, collaborations, joint ventures, for example. So the reason why I'm just bringing those two types in there as well is you can have someone that goes, oh, I need to buy that domain name, I need to get out there and be the person that's shining the light on it. But actually, that might not be their best way. They might be going, okay, how do I actually get in front of the right audience or the right people, but I do it in much more of a deal maker perspective? Or how do I do it in a way that might be much more, you know, your way? I know you're more of a Lord kind of profile, for example, and they are really good at kind of creating order, leveraging structure and analysing and how do we make this better effectively, right? And that also kind of leans into the mechanic profile. And again, I know I'm using a lot of words here, but can you see how the mechanic is quite different from a creator? A creator is like, give them a blank sheet of paper, that's where they flow. But mechanic is much more naturally focused around how do we improve it, how do we refine it, how do we make things better. So if I work with a business owner who's a mechanic, what we have to make sure that they do is how do we quickly get them having that first version out there? Because actually, it's once they've got the first, you know, minimal, let's say, viable product out there or experience, that's where their magic comes in. They can go, okay, how do I now make it better? How do I refine it? How do I tweak that? But the part that they'll struggle initially will be the coming up with it in the first place. There's so many people, often when I work with, that they're creating a version of business that they think they should and not actually aligning it to what do they really want, what's their measure of success, what do they not want? And then they go, why am I miserable? Why is this not flowing? It's often because they've just kind of, you know, with the best intention, but actually blindly just followed somebody else's blueprint. That's not the best way for them.
Well, I think that's another thing, isn't it? That's so important to, you know, there's so much noise out there, and if you actually spent all your time, you know, I mean, one of my favourite quotes actually is from Marie Forleo, where she says, "Create before you consume." Yeah. And it's something that whenever I come across it and remember it, I try and do it. But it's so easy to just get sucked into, I'll just check LinkedIn. I'll just have a look and see what people are saying on Instagram. And before you know it, you've got 12 different voices in your heads of so-and-so who's doing this, who's amazing at that because they're one of those kind of people and they're not like you at all. And then you've got, you know, 5 free challenges or courses that you go, I really must sign up for that. That looks really interesting. Oh, that's a free PDF. And then suddenly you've entirely lost your connection to you and actually how you work best and what's right for you.
Absolutely. And even what's right for you in this next period of your business. So for example, you know, you might go, great, one of my key things that I really want to focus upon is, let's say, so clarity and direction is really important to me. So that's where you kind of connect it into your goals, your offering, your messages, etc. But if you go, right, actually, one of the key things I want to do is, I'm just going to use, let's say, I want to kind of create a podcast. Can you see how then, yes, it might be helpful for you to go like, oh, there's a challenge there, or there's a course, or there's a podcast about creating a podcast, right? Because then you can then apply it in a short space of time. But if you go, I want to have a podcast at some point, but let's say even if it's not in the next 90 days, what's the point in you doing that podcast course or listening to that? It's just noise. It's not actually going to be helpful for you in that way. So I'm very much more of the mindset of being really discerning. And that's why you need to understand, like, what do you want? What is right for you? So that you can kind of like cut away a lot of that thing to go, oh, that's right, but not right for right now. Or that's good for them, but that's not right for my way of doing it as well. And that's why I think if you don't know this, one of the things that I'm often having to deal with, Nina, with my clients is helping them to kind of build up their confidence around their mastering their mindset is what I call it. It's about actually you're probably spending too much time thinking you're not doing things right because you're stuck in comparisonitis. They're doing it that way, I should do it that way, etc. Instead of going, hold on, what is my best way? And also, how do I make sure that I'm not trying to be like an all-rounder, that I have to try and wear all the different hats? Because actually that doesn't help you get consistency or the momentum to help you in that way. So it is about just trusting ourselves more to go, let's get curious about how do I do it in the best way for me.
I think, it is so hard to do. And I think that, obviously you have coached me at various points over the last sort of 10 years or so. And I think possibly some of that's finally starting to go into my head. I think that I find that, I think even more recently when we've spoken, I've had quite a lot of ideas floating around and sort of a bit of this and a bit of that. But actually, I'm trying to think what it is that's actually suddenly got me that clarity recently. I was at a business event probably about couple of months ago, and you know how messages sometimes they don't land for years and years and years, and suddenly someone says it in a way that you go, oh yeah. Totally. Or it just combines, or maybe it's just that you hadn't got all the right bits of information to connect it all up in your brain at that point. And I saw there was a speaker talking about, she was talking about vision and mission and goals and kind of how that all follows through, which all makes perfect sense. And I've got a marketing diploma, I know all this stuff,
totally.
But yet every time I listen to it's just never quite got there. And then something about either the way she was describing it or some other things that may have been going on, I just went, well that's really obvious, isn't it? That if I take it, and I took it back to, okay, what is it that I actually want to do and want to help people with? And actually what I want to help people with is enjoying their work, using their creativity and actually using their strengths and being able to do that. And then when I stepped back, it suddenly made everything, it's like, oh, so why am I doing that thing? And why am I doing that thing? Why am I talking about that? Stop talking about all of that other stuff. Here you go. And somehow that just makes it simple.
But isn't it amazing when you hear it from a different perspective and you go, that makes sense? And often I find that is when somebody has either worked with you or knows what you do really well, they can sometimes be the best people to describe it to other people, because then you can go, that's how you see it and that's how they see the value or how you help them or what your magic is really. Yeah.
But I think it's... it's interesting how that then kind of makes it simpler, and then weirdly, all of those other things that I've heard all throughout the years, and all of the things, some of the conversations we've had about some of the ways that maybe I would be best approaching things. Yeah. Suddenly it makes sense, because suddenly I go, oh, yeah.
Definitely. And then, but you're just evolve, we get a different perspective, and that's where we get to go, well, what's that next version? Like, you've known me over the years as well, and again, and I shared that comment before about sometimes when somebody else says it, it works really, really well. It's coming up for over about a year and a half ago now, I was at a conference, and I had people like, what do you do? And I think at that point I was still kind of really talking about, I'm a business coach, but so are so many other business coaches out there. Does that make sense? And it was so interesting where there was a couple of people that were peers that knew me really, really well, and then they were going, you need to speak to Osmaan, for example, right? But they always leaned into much more, he is all about how do you understand what your superpower is. He's all about how do you do it. And I was like, Whereas I, up until that point, Nina, I would probably talk about business coach, but actually lean more into the mindset element. But fundamentally, when I was actually working with coaching clients, I was all about how do you understand your superpower? How do we know what your wealth dynamics profile is, and how do you apply it? So that's kind of where, for me, the penny dropped to go, that's not just a side thing. How do I actually kind of lead with that much more? Because then it gives you that chance to go, and so what? How does that help you to grow your business?
Yeah. And I think, and that is what's so fascinating about people, and why I'm, I guess, curious about creativity as well. That there's so many different things that come into it, and that, whether I'm talking to somebody on this podcast who has loads and loads of ideas, and that is actually something that maybe they struggle with because they have too many of them, or maybe their creativity is in a different way. I mean, I've been trying to talk on this series of the podcast. I'm trying to get some different perspectives and some slightly different businesses, and also bring in talking about this, which is a bit different to some of the other conversations, because I think that, you know, there will be people listening who relate to having lots of ideas, but there will also be people listening who think, actually, that's not really me. I wouldn't describe myself as creative. But, you know, actually maybe by listening to talking about some of the tech and some of the you know, the systems or the supporting roles, can actually think, do you know what, there is creativity in that. It's not what, you know, it's not arts and crafts, it's not painting, it's not writing, it's not the things that people traditionally think of as creative, but are still fundamentally important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the key thing, is that once we understand that and recognise that there's different parts of it that really make us more excited, and that's great to know. And it doesn't mean that we can't do the parts that are not within our natural flow, but it gives us the awareness to go, okay, why is it that I might not be enjoying this part as much? So again, you know, one quick example is that I absolutely love, like, one of my ideal days is I could be back to back with coaching clients. Okay, love it, because I'm in there working with them, I'm grounded, I'm like, you know, in their corners, my sleeves are rolled up to go, like, how do I help them in that way? But yes, in my business, there are things that I create, okay, but so let's say, for example, it's like, you know, how do, you know, whether it's marketing or lead magnets or new courses, I love it to a point, but if I'm then busy squirreling away on something like that for like a week or something, right, I can quite quickly notice, like, you know, I'm not as much in flow compared to if I was, like, you know, on coaching calls. So it's not to go, I'm doing it wrong, but it gives me that chance to go, okay, but why am I doing this? How is that going to help my current clients or my future clients? Connecting back into that gives me that chance to go, okay, that it's okay, Osmaan. It's just a short period, right? But also it gives me that chance to go in those moments, and it goes back to what you're talking about. How do I do certain things that still top me up in those moments where I might not be doing the things that are as naturally in flow? And that's kind of where it's like, okay, how am I having much more conversations with other people? Does that make sense? Whether it might not be clients, it's like, and it feels like I'm kind of still grounded. And I'm sure it's the same with yourself. It's like, you know, there's certain things that you go, I love it, it's so natural, I can do it, but I'm also having to do things that take a bit more effort.
I mean, it's also, you know, similarly, it's, you know, thinking about podcasts as well. I mean, I know we've had conversations about the role of a podcast for somebody like me, because I'm never going to be the world's top podcast on anything really, but for me the value is in having conversations and what I learn from them, and actually being able to then share these conversations with other people's networks, so that other people say, oh, actually she's quite nice, you know, she looks like she's got something interesting to say. And it just introduces new people into that network. But for me, I'm just fascinated by it. So it's just some of the stuff I learn from it. It also gives me ideas for things I might write, or things I might develop to help clients that I'm working with, or even problems that I could solve that I hadn't even thought about that I could solve.
Definitely. And what I'm hearing from that is you know what game you're playing. So you're not using this as like, oh, this is going to be the thing that's going to help me trying to be a star profile. Does that make sense? Or it's not going to be the thing, like, I don't have to come up to, you know, every podcast, I'm like, here's my best new framework, my strategy. That's not your intention. That's not what it is. It's about kind of like just being in there, getting curious, having conversations, and naturally, I'm sure, you know, as it's already happened in our conversation, you get to kind of bring your perspective into things, the way that you look at things, that's more natural to you, and that can connect with the right people that might go, oh, that makes sense to me, or I need a bit of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously we've talked a bit about different kinds of people, but in terms of people who are very creative and do need that variety in their business, what kind of thoughts do you have around helping them to keep that fresh, but without just sort of going off on a tangent and never coming back to what they're supposed to be doing?
Definitely, and I've got lots of examples of business owners that are like that, especially those that are kind of from a wealth dynamics perspective, you know, those creators and the stars and mechanic profiles as well. So the one thing is, it's about how do we channel that and understanding, like, what does success look like? So, you know, where are we trying to get to with your business? So having that clear idea of the vision, i.e. what are we trying to kind of to build here? How do we grow it? Because naturally what will happen for some type of business owners is they'll get to the point where they'll go, yeah, okay, well, what's next? And then they'll plant a lot of seeds, they've got lots of great results, and then they might go, oh, let me go and do something else. But it's about how do you then go, like, channel that creativity into, let's say, your marketing, your approaches, or one part of your product offering, or what can we now launch, but it doesn't take away from what you're already doing. So that we've got some consistency. It's like more about, the way I think about it, it's more about like, okay, how do we build on it rather than jumping from one part of the garden and going, oh, I'm bored of this, now let's go to somewhere completely a different part, and now let's start, you know, sowing some seeds there. Do you know what I mean? But we're then not actually kind of getting the reaping the rewards of all the work that you've done. So I definitely think it's about, you know, and I'm having to do this a lot with my clients as well. It's like, how do we keep that freshness and also challenge them back when they go, oh, I've had an idea, Osmaan, and I'm like, great. I mean, I was like, but let me just understand, or let's help just, how does that fit in with what we're trying to do? Sometimes it is about, well, they're now at that point of what's next, and it's like quite a big evolution, and that's great. Yeah. We might kind of retire certain things, they might kind of like launch new things, but most often it's just the reason why they're having those thoughts is just they're a bit bored. And it's like, okay, let's not throw away your great results or consistency just because you're bored, but how do we now kind of use that as a opportunity to go, how do we bring a bit of freshness maybe in terms of one of the things that you're doing, or a creative way of kind of like unleashing that. And sometimes it's a case of going, I actually just need to get that creativity maybe, but not in my business. It could come from a hobby, it could come from a different kind of avenue.
Or it could be just a little bit, you know, I mean, I sometimes talk about bite-sized creativity. Yeah. So, you know, just spending 15 minutes doing a bit of creative writing before you start in the morning, or, and in, you know, on the last series of this podcast, two of my guests then went away and started drawing because we were talking about it, and they said, oh, actually, I haven't done that for a while. That's something I like doing. Mm-hmm. But I think the other thing, talking about those ideas that come up, I mean, again, referring back to my last series where I spoke to Abby, who was the last guest in the series, and she talked about having her notebook that she, you know, she's a well-established business owner, so she knows her patterns and the fact that she has all these ideas, and she said that she now will just write them down, and every now and then she will review them with her coach. Mm-hmm. to have a look and see whether she does want to do anything with them. But I think that's something that's quite interesting, that I've worked with people where I've said, you know, find somewhere to store those ideas, because you might want to come back to them at some point. They might be too big to do anything with now. They might be little things that, as you say, it's about, you know, actually, can you weave that in somewhere, even if it's you know, whether it's a lead magnet, whether it's a little tweak to something that just makes them feel like they've got a little bit of novelty.
Yeah, absolutely. And that can sometimes give that chance to kind of go, did it land? What does it look like? And you might go, it really did. And therefore you might be able to go, and I want to kind of bring that a little bit more into what I do. So it can evolve it. Or you might go, yeah, that's cool, but it was for one season. Does that make sense? It's fine, right? But it's kind of, it gives you that chance to kind of play with it in a way without kind of overthinking and not doing, or actually just kind of to the detriment of some of the great results that you're already getting, or the momentum that you might be building. And that's kind of what I love helping business owners to kind of like keep that momentum going, keep it growing without kind of stopping that just because they're bored.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, and the other thing is, I think there's a great power in just doing small things. And I was actually having a conversation with a coaching client last week, and I was explaining back to her something that my health coach had explained to me, when I was saying, I want to get a really good habit of actually doing some small weights and things like that, because I need to be introducing something like that, and saying, but if I only do it, you know, if I only do a little bit once a week, I'm not doing anything, am I? And so she said to me, my health coach, she said to me, it's you're doing more than if you were doing nothing.
Yeah.
And that, if you do that every week, imagine what you're doing, and actually you will build it up along the way. And it's the same, and this is what I was explaining to the client I was coaching, that actually, there were some things that she wanted to do, and I was saying, well, if you allocate half an hour a week, and maybe you alternate between these particular things that you want to do, all to move the business forward, then actually, in 2 months' time, just think how much stuff you'll have done. So don't beat yourself up about the fact you've only got half an hour in your whole week, because everything else is delivery for clients, and all you've got is that half an hour. You're still going to make progress, because things will happen when you start doing all these different things.
Definitely. And it's a part of that's a mindset perspective, and it's also building in that habit to go, okay, if I do that, what does that look like? How am I being intentional with my time there as well? And what I often find, and tell me, Nina, if you agree with this, is sometimes when people say, I don't have a lot of time, I only got half an hour, and then they actually start to do it, then they go, oh, I've got some traction with it, and then they find extra time, because they might stop doing things that they've not noticed, like maybe, what about all the time that we might be scrolling on certain things, or binging the latest Netflix kind of season. But when you actually directionalize it, but you're kind of in the moment, and the momentum starting, then you can let me do more because you want to. But if you were to say to that person, before you even start, right, we need to find, X amount of hours, it automatically feels like, oh, no, I can't do that. So I definitely agree with you in terms of it's the small things that allow us to kind of just make it easy to kind of move it forward. And then it's those tiny habits can kind of compound as well.
Yeah. Well, which brings us back to what we were saying earlier about the create before you consume.
Yeah.
Actually know what, in an ideal world, we'd all get up in the morning, we'd know what we were doing. We wouldn't sit there and scroll any kind of social media or anything, and we'd just get straight on with it, and we'd be amazingly focused, and we'd have lots of clients, and everything would be well.
But we'd also be like robots, and that's not what makes us human.
Absolutely. Well, absolutely. And you do get inspiration from social media, and you make connections with it. And I guess one of the things that social media has been good for me in business over the years has been some of the groups that I've been involved in. Yeah. I mean, I know that we actually know each other from a Facebook group which came from a challenge or a course or something. And there were, a whole load of us who were thinking about the same kinds of things, and we had a Facebook group, and it's amazing where those kind of connections come from, and how some of the people keep in touch and kind of work together or whatever.
It's a ripple effect, and I think that is that case of those small things that can make a big difference if you then go, okay, there's lots of opportunities. And I think it just gives you that creative way of going, how am I going to figure this out? I mean, how am I going to help to kind of solve this, or where's the best opportunities? And that then just takes us back to kind of what we're talking about. It's like, if you understand what's the best way for me to do that, we can be creative, we can be much more choosy, we can get rid of a lot of that noise out there, and we stop forcing things because we think we have to do it, instead of going, no, actually I'm choosing to do it because I'm enjoying it, it feels more natural. And there's definitely, we don't live in a one size fits all world, Nina. Do you know what I mean? And that's what makes the world curiously fun in my eyes, and what makes it kind of alive.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much for joining me today. Where can people find you if they want to learn a little bit more about what you do?
Oh, thanks, Nina. You could probably tell I could talk about this for hours. For me, my biggest invitation for anybody that has kind of been listening and thinking, but am I experiencing as much flow as I could in my business at the moment? I'd love for you to pop over to my website. So if you go to osmansharif.com/Nina, what it'll do is it'll take you to a free resource, and in less than 97 seconds on average is how long it takes individuals to do. You can quickly find out, are you currently forcing things? Like I call it, are you in the force zone, or are you in the opportunity zone where some things are going well but you've got a real opportunity to dial it in, or are you in the growth zone across the 6 fundamental areas that I help business owners around as well? And that insight alone will hopefully give you that chance to go, right, what am I going to do about it? How do I continually grow, or what can I actually put my time and my attention in? So I'd love to give you that invitation to kind of, to see what does that look like. And if what I've talked about in terms of wealth dynamics and the different 8 profiles kind of resonate, that's a good first step, because I'll then kind of talk through in terms of how you can do things in the best way when you understand what your best way is by understanding your superpower as well. So thank you, Nina, for having me on. I can, love having these conversations, and thank you for also being that reminder that creativity can happen in so many different ways as well.
Thank you very much. It was great to talk to you. Thank you.
Bye-bye, Sure.
Bye. Thank you for listening to Creative Conversations. I'm Nina Lenton. I'm an untangler and coach, and you can find out more about my work and this podcast at ninalenton.co.uk.